The title I have chosen for this presentation is Didactics and Teaching Innovation, Initial Phase of Implementation, Inclusion and Gender Perspective. Let me start by asking you a question. When you think about American history and politics, whose voices do you hear? Whose speeches come to your mind? Probably, like most people, you'll probably think about Abraham Lincoln, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, maybe President Roosevelt, Martin Luther King, Bill Clinton, all men. Obviously, all important. But what about the women? Today, I'd like to share with you a teaching innovation project that's addressing this gap. But this gap not by adding a few women's names to a syllabus, but by fundamentally rethinking how we teach, how students learn, and whose knowledge we value. And this project was first implemented at the UNED during the 2024-2025 academic year under the title Shedding Light on American Women Voices Through the Analysis of Significant Text. And due to its success this year, we've expanded it to Raising Voices and Awareness, Women's Struggle on Equal Rights in the Anglophone World, extending our focus beyond American context to include women's activism throughout the English-speaking world. Both center, obviously, on a very basic idea or simple idea. That is, what happens when we place women's voices at the heart of the academic analysis. For this reason, I've divided my presentation into 4 different sections, as you can see in the screen. First section, the problem and the materials. Let me start by saying that it is true that first-year university students typically encounter textbooks that mention women, but women in passing. Maybe they get a paragraph about the suffragettes, or maybe a footnote about Eleanor Roosevelt. But how often do students actually read women's speeches? And how often do they analyze women's argument with the same rigor they apply to canonical main authors? Almost never. So our project challenges this. And for that, we selected 10 speeches and addresses by American women spanning from 1917 to 2025. Obviously, here I'm referring to the 2024-2025 project, okay? And we don't do it randomly, we do it deliberately. For that, we chose, for example, among others, Carrie Chapman Catt addressing the Congress in 1917 about women's suffrage, or Frances Perkins, who was the first woman in a presidential cabinet explaining New Deal social insurance in 1935, or Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman elected to Congress arguing equal rights in 1969, or Hillary Clinton declaring at Beijing in 1995 that women's rights are human rights, Michelle Obama on girls' education, and Deb Halla, among others, as I said, the first Native American cabinet secretary. Did you notice something? But obviously that these women represent different races, different political parties, different eras, and different issues. And this is genuine diversity. It is the America we often forget when we teach history. As for section 2, here I'm going to refer to that didactic framework, and here's where the pedagogy gets interesting, because it is divided into 2 different phases, the individual phase and the group analysis second phase, okay? But I'm going to focus my attention on the individual analysis because it's the one that I'm working in and this project is about. In this individual phase, the students, obviously, they get the text and they need to select one of them. And and I say that they need to select because this choice creates investment. It motivates them. So the students, after selecting the text, they need to read it, they need to find out information, they need to analyze the text and write an academic commentary about it. Sounds straightforward, right? But here's where the didactic innovation starts. Is we treat this as a learning process, not as a test. And I'm going to explain myself. So the students, after reading, analyzing, finding information, okay, they submit a first draft. And we as tutors, what we do is we provide detailed, personalized feedback, not just a good job or needs work or we give them a grade. No, what we do is a specific constructive guidance, right? So the students will revise this feedback. They will correct the mistakes, analyze the information they had, surf the net again. They will look for information and they will submit a second draft. With that draft, we provide more feedback and they will revise it again, and then and only then is when they will submit a final version. And this is formative assessment in action. Learning through doing, learning through feedback, or learning through revision. It mirrors how actual academic work happens when peer review and revision are something normal, not a sign of failure. So I'll give you an example. One student, let's call her Selina, chose a text, Michelle Obama's speech on girls' education, for example, and she sends us a first draft. And in that first draft, she showed, on the one hand, good structure and proper formatting. However, she struggles with citation mechanisms and had some grammatical issues, for example. And on the other hand, there's a lack of information related to the object of the speech. Fine, so we didn't mark it as wrong, we didn't move on, or we didn't give her a grade and no comments. What we did was explaining why certain citations formats work better than others, how we integrate quotes in the text, what makes academic English distinct from conversational English, and of course, in relation to the main point, we could suggest that a student possible questions or guide the student towards information that would be essential to mention, obviously without giving that student the answer. So Selina, the student, will revise it, will add information, will correct the mistakes, etc., and will submit a second draft, where we can see that there's a substantial improvement. So she incorporated our feedback, she added analytical depth, she polished her language, and that is didactics, the art and science of teaching. So we took a different approach that goes from extensive patient feedback addressing each issue, recognition of her effort, obviously, concrete strategy for improvement as well, and the student, with all this feedback, persisted, revised, and kept working. So that person, the student, continued being motivated. So therefore, the journey itself became the learning. And this is what distinguishes teaching from evaluating. We're not sorting students into categories of success and failure. What we are doing is scaffolding their improvement, meeting them where they are and helping them to grow. And later is when they will move to that second phase, that is the group analysis. Apart from that, in section 3 that I call the student-tutor relationship, this kind of teaching, I have to say that requires a particular kind of relationship between students and instructor. And in distant education, which is what we do at UNED, this relationship is especially crucial because we don't have a face-to-face classroom interaction. We have feedback exchange, and this is or this becomes our classroom. So through written comments, we create a dialogue. So students come to see us not as let's say, distant judges, but as invested mentors. So this matters enormously when you're learning, obviously. Think about it. If you submit a work, you as a student, or when you were a student at university, and you receive feedback that feels purely critical, how motivated would you be? But obviously, none. So we deliberately crafted feedback that was constructive without being condescending, rigorous without being harsh, supportive without being soft. So one of our key pedagogical principles was that students need to learn from mistakes in context where revision is possible. And these mistakes aren't failures, they are learning opportunities. Okay? So this is particularly important when students are working in a foreign language, as is our case. Most of our students are Spanish using English. They are managing content comprehension at the same time, analytical thinking, and linguistic production simultaneously. And this, believe me, is cognitively demanding for them. They need patience, they need support, not just correction or judges. Furthermore, in section 4, gender discrimination, let's talk explicitly about the gender perspective, because it operates at multiple levels. There you have on the screen. At the content level, for example, with this project, what we're trying is making visible women who have been marginalized or erased from standard curricula. So students learn that women have always been political actors, intellectual leaders, or maybe shapers of political discourse, even when these history books ignore them. At an analytical level, students also learn to recognize how gender shapes rhetorical choices. So, for example, how does this woman address the intersection of racism and sexism? Or how this character navigates between a woman in a world-dominated Senate? These aren't just historical curiosities. They are analytical frameworks that a student can apply elsewhere. Thirdly, at a pedagogical level, here we need to say that we model collaborative, not hierarchical teaching practices. Okay, so we as tutors, adapted to individual students, to their needs, okay, rather than applying a rigid approach. And finally, at a consciousness level, students here develop awareness of structural inequalities and the struggles required to challenge them. So this is actual critical thinking about social reality. And that is the power of this approach. Students develop comparative, critical perspectives that expand beyond content or course content. So let me conclude with this. Didactics matters. How we teach shapes what students learn, but also how they learn and who they become as thinkers and citizens. And the key probably is scaffolding, so breaking complex tasks into simpler steps, which provide guidance at each stage. So creates opportunities for revision. It's not a summative evaluation, but it's a formative assessment. So these projects also demonstrate that attention, apart from what I said before, to gender perspective isn't about political correctness or tokenism. It's about educational justice. Recognizing that whose voices we center, whose knowledge we validate, and whose perspective we take seriously are pedagogical choices with real consequences. So when we place women's voices at the heart of analysis, when we support the students through iterative learning processes, and when we create a dialogue between the student tutor rather than hierarchical ones, we don't just teach content. We model a different way of thinking about knowledge, authority, and academic community. So gender-focused curriculum transform learning. And this is what we're doing with the project and what transformative pedagogy looks like. Thank you.